Now, I will be the moderator of this panel, which is a great responsibility to talk about an important topic, finishing Forum Brazil-Africa. It is a responsibility and a privilege because this topic that we're going to discuss by important panelists that master this topic will help us to understand how we can solve it all. If we have no resources, we will not move forward. So we have here Jorge, Felipe, Lessa, Alberto, and Jean-Marie that will give us ideas like clues and tips. So the topic we have is the role of banks and financial institutions to foster modern agriculture. I'd like to start with George. George was an employee from World Bank for a long time. He's a economics professor. He worked in multilateral banks, and I got to know George when he was at the federal government work, uh, working an agenda of the African Bank of Development and also Brazilian banks. How can resources reach those in need? So I'd like to say what Marco said. There is a 400 pages book that costs $40,000, and at the end of the day, the resources doesn't reach those in need. So what is the solution for that? Okay, João, before I start saying anything, I'd like to say good morning to you all, to all panelists. It's important to say that this topic is a very important one. We have a dilemma here. Is it the financing that makes agriculture to happen, or a good agriculture and good projects that can identify and mitigate risks and be structured and make economics work that will attract resources? That's a great discussion, right? Having said that, this clearly requires public policies and interventions. That are risky areas in the world agriculture. This is not only something that happens in Africa or Brazil. We have climate change, growing topics associated to new pests and threats. And it's hard to think that we will make the money reach to them in a non-professionalized kind of agriculture. The topic is modern agriculture, right? So we can discuss what does modern agriculture mean, but if it is professionalized in terms of the use of sophisticated infrastructure and advanced knowledge and access to technology, access to markets, you know, access to everything that can make agriculture a profitable activity, all this will attract investors, funds, resources. All this is very hard and difficult, and the role of banks, especially development banks, maybe is it is hard for bankers to release money. They cannot lose money because the money is not theirs. The money belongs to the shareholders. So the banks have to help to structure operations and make agriculture have access to the best technologies, working in warranty funds and helping the government to structure policies that makes their access to credit easier and things like that. things that comes before credit, helping to pave the way so that the credit will come later. Right. Jean-Marie, first time I went to
With the development bank, I had a meeting, and then I had another meeting, and another one, maybe 20 meetings to see what they would like to bring at the end of the day in terms of investment to a specific commodity, right? So, looking to Rwanda, where you are coming from, what do you think that would be the magic movement to consolidate this possibility of bringing answers very quick for the people that need?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to bring what I would say Rwanda and Africa perspective. I'm from the Kigali International Financial Center, which is an ecosystem builder. We are building and positioning Rwanda as a financial hub to precisely to attract capital to finance our economy, but also to finance Africa economy in general. So allow me maybe to share some statistics. I think it was shared before. Africa has 6% of cultivable land, right? Yet we still import more than 40 billion USD in food products. In Rwanda, agriculture contribute to 25% of GDP. Employment, I think it's around 65% of the population into agriculture sector. Yet the financial sector or the banking sector, which is the traditional financial sector, contributes to 3%. So there is a gap in terms of financing, and this is where institutions like KFC or Kigali International Financial Center comes in to prepare or to improve, I would say, the conducive environment so that we can be able to attract capital. We've done a lot of work in terms of legal framework, in terms of tax incentives, in terms of non-tax incentives. So we are really preparing I would say the ecosystem to be able to accommodate the capital that are needed. It's very important that we have a conducive environment that will be able to attract capital. We've seen in the past, when we talk about financial centers, we've seen in the past where funds, my predecessor was talking about funds, were kind of raising money, but investing on the continent. But you would see, for example, that the investment vehicle or the decision makers are domiciled outside of the continent.
Okay.
So we want to change that
I'll come
narrative.
to this point later. Thank you. Felipe Rubin. Eu conheci o Felipe no...
I met Philippe at an international event, and I very quickly understood that he became very interested in Africa before I even mentioned my interest in Africa. So we've had many interesting conversations. He's been a financial or investment advisor, and he likes to talk about good investment opportunities. So if you were going to give some free advice to our audience here, and his advice isn't very cheap, just so you know, but how would you attract an investor to a place that has many challenges, as we have heard about here, many difficulties, but looking at it through an optimistic perspective? I know you're an optimistic guy, so how would you advise this interested investor, and how would they be able, thinking about a Brazilian investor looking to invest in Africa, what would you say? Well, first of all, good morning to all of you. Georgie said that there's something that's very interesting, the dilemma. We say sometime, which came first, the chicken or the egg? So the investor wants stability, wants a guarantee for their investments, obviously. And when you're talking about the agricultural sector, we have a cultural issue in Brazil, and I believe Africa is very similar. We have the same, it's a cultural deficit, I might say. So we don't have guarantees. We have a gap in how to present your projects to an investor. We don't have a professionalized agricultural sector yet. So many times the investors don't are a little hesitant and cautious before investing. So I'm launching a credit cooperative with 10,000 small farmers, and I want to facilitate access to ProAgro, which is a program. It's not that there isn't money available. There is money, there is capital available, but investors need to easily see the potential to understand. We need to understand the cultural gap we have in the sector, and the financial sector is very aggressive in terms of the metrics that they have and the profit that they want to see. So we have this difficulty of getting people to explain to farmers why it's necessary to professionalize their operations. And so understanding this distance, this gap between the private financial sector and the farmers, then I think with more education we can bring them closer together. But I believe that the state, the government, can help to make up this gap. We still have this huge gap because we don't have a professionalized agricultural sector yet. Bosco, something I'd like to mention that is connected to this, which kind of makes it harder to bring the financial sector and the farmers or producers together, is the lack of guarantees. So many times these farms aren't even legalized. So this is a specific example. The person has that land, it's their land, but they don't know how to have that, legalized to offer as a guarantee. So I think we need to, first of all, we need to understand this gap between the small farmers who want to sell their products and to feed their families and the financial market. There is this huge gap. Here in Brazil, we say Faria Lima, where the financial center is. So we need to try to, bring them closer together. Okay, good advice. Well, sometimes we hear good advice and don't use it, but I think it's much better when we hear good advice and follow it. I also like to say that what is good for Brazil can't just be, unplugged in Brazil and plugged into Africa automatically. You have to respect the individuality, the uniqueness of each location. In Africa, you have 54 countries. You can't believe that the northern African countries are the same as the southern African countries. So what works in Brazil, in the state of Paraná or in the Amazon or Ceará, okay, it works here, but it might not necessarily work in African countries. You have to consider the cultural aspects. Lessa, you work in a regional bank. You just gave us firsthand a study sponsored by the Banco da Amazônia about the potential for products from the Brazilian Amazon in the African continent. So what type of incentives can the bank give, looking at the bank's experience over these years? How could that be transferred into the African context? Felipe talked about the incentives from government organizations or public banks. And then I will go back to my first question. So when we get to the field, to the farmer, how can they access these incentives? Well, Bosco, this is a very complex question. You only have 2 minutes to answer. Okay, so let me get straight to the point. Um, the way we work at Banco da Amazônia is that we look at the agricultural producers, the farmers, in three different ways. We look at the micro farmers, the very small producer. We can't give them money alone. We have to give them money and technical assistance. And this technical assistant goes from sustainable management of their production, teaching them new techniques for producing food, helping them to understand the whole sales chain, how they are going to sell their production so that it can become more profitable. So with those small farmers, we say we need to take their hands and walk along with them. Okay? Then we look at the middle layer. So those farmers who aren't small, but they aren't large enough to have access to better conditions for buying inputs or seeds, or access to the better logistics chains to distribute their production. So we also take them by their hand, but we aren't going to help them with the basics of their production. So we're going to figure out how to add technical assistance, how can we help them organize themselves into chains with other producers so they can have, with a larger volume, they can access these logistics, distribution chains, and to maybe share equipment and maybe storage space, things like that. And when we talk about the large-scale producers, then financial resources are important, but at the right price, affordable prices, and the large producers need to understand some of the nuances of selling at large scale. So usually the farmers end up forgetting some important details like this proper storage, as was mentioned in the previous panel, of losing some of the production because of not having proper drying or storage space. So they need to have their own silos. They need to invest in their own silos. So that's not going to be an expenditure actually, but it's going to offer them flexibility to have their product stored properly, to sell it at the right moment because they have the proper place to store it. So money is important, but more important, or along with that money, we need to offer technical assistance that is adequate, that properly fits the size of that operation. So we need to encourage farmers to generate riches, generate their sustenance, and it moves the economy around that. Okay, I will come back to that and talk about the African context. Now, we have a representative of another bank, Banco do Brasil. It's Brazil Bank, so it's a beautiful name. It's the Bank of Brazil. So my question for you, Alberto, is why is Banco do Brasil only in Brazil, and why doesn't it go to Africa? But there's more to my question. I remember I was someplace, we have our ambassador, Carlos Duarte, here. I was someplace, and a Brazilian business person asked me, why doesn't Banco do Brasil finance Brazilian businesses that want to go to Africa? So this is my question to you also. Why doesn't the bank finance Brazilian businesses that want to expand into Africa? Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here discussing such relevant terms. And I think more than answers, I think we can provoke reflections that will help us in our development in Brazil and in Africa. I've been the head of agribusiness at Banco do Brasil for 1 year now. We have a portfolio of around 400 billion reais, $75 billion approximately. I've welcomed 2 different missions from Africa to exchange ideas and talk about how some of our bank's models could be replicated in other countries, or our financing models of rural credits could be used in other countries. Maybe in some strategic decision, the bank might decide to expand into other countries. We do work in other countries, usually financing Brazilian businesses that go into other countries. Um, we don't have any retail operations in other countries, but I think beyond that, we can help other banks in other countries to find ways of replicating successful models that we have used. This is a coincidence. In Brazil, currently, we have 60 years of Law 4829, which is the law that instituted the National Rural Credit System in Brazil. Until November 5th, 1965, rural credit was financing just like any other type of financing. It wasn't part of a public policy for that. So, looking at our agriculture today and the successes that we have had, it has seemed like, wow, it happened quickly, but actually, for when you try to find out, and you ask, could we shorten, not take 6 decades to develop that? Maybe we can offer some of our experience. We used to import food until the 60s, and today we're the largest exporter of foods, and we have become a reference in agriculture globally. And this has happened through the development of solid public policies with huge challenges. As Felipe mentioned, we have the problem with guarantees, but having good public policies and good partnerships with the private sector and good execution of the financial sector as well, we can have these models replicated in other places around the world. We have been working with many businesses that are in Africa. So our focus is to finance Brazilian businesses, help them somehow in developing them to grow their business, and some of them do have operations in Africa. And when they decide to expand, we make these decisions at the bank. So Lessa is our colleague. He worked at the bank. So when we make the decision of taking our operations internationally, they work as a pendulum. We are focused more on the domestic market at times, and then we focus on expanding internationally. So more recently, we have focused on the domestic market, just thinking about agribusiness, because it's a huge market, over 1 billion reais. And so we have other financing that happens in private institutions also. So we are very focused on the domestic market, also in microcredit. As Lessa knows, in the Amazon, we are trying to take this rural credit to these regions of the country, like in the Amazon, and it's been a very successful program. Okay, well, I'll come back with another question in a while. So, Felipe, going back to you. So, you work in Brazil in buying grains and commodities here. This can also be presented or carried over into the African context. How can your bank, in interacting with an African bank, and you talked about the guarantees, for the investment. So how can a Brazilian businessman as yourself, how can you send your product through a broker, and how will the banks talk to each other? You have the bank's rating, so give us another piece of advice, please, Felipe. Well, when we're talking about an international operation, we need to have political security. We have to understand the other country's political scenario, how they are connected to the international payment system, all of these elements. I believe that that tends to become easier over time. We were talking about the exchange rates and how the stable coins have affected this, cryptocurrencies, and I think that's the future. That could be a solution for the African market. You know, we are developing countries, need to, connect with another continent which is also developing. So we have to get the blessing of the American market or other markets to have financial transactions. That's, you have an arbitrary judge there who is saying if you can or can't do something. So we have this barrier that is the main barrier that we have at the moment. So if the African country is connected to a system, have a rating that is acceptable for us or for them, if we are acceptable to them, have an acceptable rating, I don't think there will be any problem. We have similar cultures, similar land conditions. I think Brazil can cooperate in many ways with Africa and vice versa, because I think it's a two-way street. I understand that Africa is going through many things that Brazil has already gone through. And as Alberto mentioned, as he mentioned, our evolution since the 60s in our agricultural sector. So, you know, but today we still have this higher entity that is going to say that we can or can't go forward with some of these transactions. So I think if the whole sector becomes more professional, it will become much easier. So, Jim Marie, back to you. If the government, at the high level of government,
Improve and amplify the partnership, the cooperation with other countries, directly with Rwanda. If Rwanda wants to do business with Brazil, you have this audience here, right? Maybe you have some investors, some agriculture mind that wants to invest in Rwanda. From the perspective of the benefit, what can you offer to this audience?
Thank you very much. I like the point that the colleague just mentioned around connecting directly, I would say, south to south without going through the intermediary. I see what you are talking about. And I believe we've done a lot of work in terms of, we are passing the regulation very soon on stable coin. So something maybe we can discuss later to see how we can connect banks using innovative solutions. But coming to your question, Rwanda is ready to receive investment. There are a lot of opportunities in terms of agriculture, in terms of infrastructure, agri-business, and what we've done is to make sure that we created a stable and conducive environment. So our role as a promotion agency to make sure that the process is setting up, the process of creating a company, starting operations is one of the most, I would say, smooth on the continent, even beyond. That's one. Second, we are trying to incentivize, production and manufacturing as well. So, if, for example, you are into agriculture and you are not only looking at servicing the domestic market, and you are looking at expanding on the continent, they are very, I would say, attractive tax incentives that we can discuss and we provide. And actually, we have already some investors from Brazil. We are here this week. We had meetings, and one of the investment bank actually is opening an entity in Rwanda, and is going to start operation very soon. So it's already happening. It's not something that we are wishing. It's already happening. But what we can do is really to guarantee and to make sure that and to give you comfort that your investment will be safe. Rwanda is ranked um, number one in terms of rule of law. So I know that there's a lot of misconception, right? A lot of negative maybe image that usually is projected from when you are outside of the continent. But rest assured that we've done quite a lot in the last decade, as you said. Your investment will be safe. You will find in the government of Rwanda probably one of the best and one of the pro-business government on the continent and beyond, to make sure that your investment is safe again. And we are also happy in something that we've done in the recent past. We are looking for co-investment. We are not only happy to, I would say, to attract and facilitate DFIs or investors to come to invest. We are also ready to, using our institutional investors, our development banks, our pension fund to kind of co-invest, which is also a way to de-risk your investment. Yeah.
I'll come back to this later. Jorge,
George, you also used the hat of BNDES, right? So I remember that once I was in South Africa and I got the information of someone saying, hey, you know that BNDES has closed their office here? And I said, no. Well, not only here, but also they closed it in Assunção and London. So the Bank of Development in Brazil has closed those 3 offices. So I'm saying this because as a development bank, Brazilian Development Bank, when they close their offices abroad, how can Brazilian investors that wants to invest and needs investment can feel safe that there is a national public policy focused on fostering that national companies, domestic companies will go abroad? By lacking BNDES abroad and lack of investment policies, how can investors, business people feel encouraged to go abroad? Does this make sense? Well, BNDES, the Brazilian Bank of Development, their main aim was to be internationalized at that point, and their main office was the London one. Assunção and South Africa's offices, they were somehow focused on business, but also focused on politics. London office was aimed at raising money, raising resources, not to take resources. So they had their own ways to identify businesses to bring foreign capital to Brazil. That was their perspective, their need. But you mentioned something important. Little presence of Brazilian banks in abroad, either BNDES or Brazil Bank, it was limited, and this inhibits Brazilian companies to go international. Although this is not a crucial element, but it's quite helpful. You can see the presence of Brazilian banks, Brazilian Banco do Brasil, Brazil Bank in Brazil, and others in the US. It's quite helpful because you feel that you are more familiar with that as a Brazilian company. I don't know if I got your question correctly. Well, that's your answer. That's fine. Jean-Marie mentioned environment. I'll use the word ecosystem. It seems that we've been using this term quite often, especially with the COP30 and climate change. What is the ecosystem that is favorable for us to have, or what action is favorable so that the modern agriculture, and this concept many times is confusing. We don't understand very much what is modern or what is out of date. So talking about modern agriculture, what is the modern of a favorable ecosystem so that where people cannot produce enough for them, but also a production to scale up all the way up to be exported. What is a favorable ecosystem when you look at your experience, as Alberto mentioned, your experience with Banco do Brasil and also president of the Development Bank? Right. This is a complex question. Okay, you have 2 minutes. When you look at the context where the Bank of the Amazon operates, we look at those three layers, looking at the small farmer. Those focus on their own subsistence. The challenge on that layer is to make resources to go to this farmer. When you look at the Amazon region, that is like a continent with logistics challenges that are quite complicated. So we have within this area the best way we show for them to take. We have traditional crops such as mandioca and açaí. So how can we use, cassava and açaí. So how can we use subsistence agriculture so we can add value? So there's no point to invest on a cassava crop, a small cassava crop, but we have to add other crops that can provide income to this small farmer throughout the year. So this is an important discussion on how we manage this kind of thing. When we look at the other two, medium and big or large farmers, so things are different. We have to create a environment where, in addition to the suitable loan and technical assistance, we have to create infrastructure so that agriculture can develop and evolve beyond the crops, beyond the grains. We are always thinking about manufacturing and agro-industry. So we have, for the first group, how can we introduce other crops beyond the subsistence crops so that families can have income throughout the year, and thus we can foster a better development. And when it comes to to medium and large producers, we have to have an environment thinking about the next steps to be taken, suitable infrastructure to flow the production and investments so that industrialization of what is produced can be done. Okay, can I add something to it? Oh, my question was to you. Let me talk about the ecosystem to have a good agriculture. When we look back 60 years ago, it seems to be something easy, but this has to be a strategy for the whole nation. Understanding that agriculture is a competitive advantage for the whole country. See other sectors such as industry facing hard times, but agriculture is growing in the domestic GDP. Looking back, when you think about credit, if you apply credit in the wrong way, that will be a problem and you can lose money. But first, that requires a lot of research. I'm a big fan of Embrapa work and other companies we have in Brazil. Whenever you go to a farm from Embrapa, you see all kinds of researches going on, looking for productivity improvements. This is a great advantage we have. This is one of the success factors that we have in Brazil, knowing that species planted in that region in that period of time will work. Of course, agriculture have climate issues and things, but the success rate is way bigger or greater than it would be without Embrapa researches. Another thing is the amount of technical schools and universities of agricultural sciences. In the 60s, all families would have a young person studying agriculture, and they would leave the school with knowledge enough to give scale to that, and they would go all over the continent, all over the country, I'm sorry, transforming our map of wealth generation in the country. And in addition to that, public policies, legal situations were being enhanced to provide a better credits. We have public policies such as Proagro is a kind of agricultural insurance for family farming. What makes a farmer to default is to plant and not be able to harvest. So we have public policies for small, medium, and large farmers. So we have public policies to acquire, to purchase food. Part of what is eaten in our schools were planted by a farmer, and the government buys part of their production for schools. The special interest rates for small farmers, they have access to better interest rates, and even the fundiary aspect. So whatever you have in terms of land aspects in Brazil was a result of public policies areas where you don't have a registration, you have a document showing that that plant belongs to that farmer, and together with that, providing rural credit in the conditions that rural credit requires. That's what I say to missions that come and visit us. Rural credit is different from other credits. It has to be connected to what is being done at the season it's being planted and with all the planning of harvesting. So this, in summary, this is a complex issue, but it's a complex topic, but this is the reason for the Brazilian success we have in agriculture. So this model that you are showing is always way more complicated. It's not so easy to understand when we are not part of this sector. You are an expert, you can understand it quite well, but if you explain this to someone who's starting in this area. So today I want to work in the agricultural sector. In order to understand all this takes a lot of time. It's not easy. I myself cannot understand it quite well. So knowledge that we want to convey for those on the other side of this requires time to learn it all. It's not that simple to understand it. And Brazil is a unequal country. What happens in the south is completely different to what happens in the north of the country. This is not criticism. This is just facts. In order to have a national policy, it's not a simple task because Brazil is a country with many inequalities. In Africa, the wish of any country is to drink from this water and make in Africa this feasible. So it's up to us to have the soft power agenda, understanding how can we transform this asset that we have and send a message to Africa that this is replicable there. And we have always to respect the individuality of each different context or country. But the Brazilian experience is very valuable. So what is the expectation that many missions that come to Brazil and they want to understand the Brazilian model? Felipe mentioned an experience that you want to launch. How was that again? Well, actually, it's a cooperative working together with Proagro to make the access of people who doesn't have the knowledge easier to this capital. So cooperatives is an important model, or are an important model, and this can bring answers to places where small farmers who cannot sit and talk to the bank manager, but a cooperative is more powerful in that. George, in a few days, will be in Belém, as many of you, me included, taking part on COP30. COP30 is an important event to the world. And there's an aspect there's a question I want to ask you about the moment when we are talking about climate justice and climate resilience. The world has changed. We're talking about situations where you have catastrophes and floods and droughts. It seems that this is becoming even more prevalent and intense. The message you're going to share at COP30, and I know you know this topic quite well, the moment that we are facing with so many difficulties, and it's becoming even more difficult that agriculture will be intense with positive results. How can we cope with climate change and natural difficulty to be resilient when finance is lacking? Okay, João, climate change came to stay. It's going to be worsened. Global warming will increase. That's an apocalyptic message. Well, okay, hold on. I'll get there. Uncertainties with regards to the industry tend to increase. The point is, how can we cope with that? There isn't much to be done. There are two ways. One is use a lot of technology. We have to develop technologies that bring more resilience. There's much being done, and Brapa is working hard on that. There are still technologies being developed in several places in the world. This is key. Another thing that seems to be key also is to pay attention to regenerative agriculture. We have evidences that show that this brings better resilience to severe climate change. So we have to work with new business models. More of the same will no longer happen. It's done. So we have to be innovative. And I think there's an important point in connection to what you're saying.
I think one of the greatest challenges that we face is food security. That has been discussed quite a bit during this event. But I think it's even greater than we imagine because the water stress is being intensified in many regions, especially in the greatest food production area is in the United States. The water supply is being depleted very fast. It's also happening in China and other areas around the world. So when we think about Africa, which is our main topic here, I've heard people saying, oh, Africa needs to stop importing food and produce food. But I think there's a little ambition lacking, maybe. If it's true that Africa has 65% of unexplored, arable land for agriculture, that Africa is open to business, why not think about Africa becoming a huge exporter of food? Now, obviously, that involves professionalizing the agricultural production, which we know needs to happen. Now, here in Brazil, we've already grown in our agriculture. Now, this kind of miracles that we see in agriculture in Brazil, it's large-scale agriculture. Lessa talked about the 3 different layers, the types of farmers. Then you have other aspects. If you're selling it to the domestic market or international market, so many different variations to that. But now, if it's true that in Africa, there is this huge, actually, not only Africa, globally, we have a huge food security challenge before us. I think Africa needs to change their business model when it comes to agriculture. I know this has to do with very sensitive issues such as land rights, such as the way that land is considered in Africa in many regions that is different than how we see it in Brazil and in the United States. So I'm not trying to undermine this, or to make it smaller than it is. I know it's a huge challenge, but there are new agendas that have to do with agriculture that need to be part of the business agenda in Africa. So I'm especially the production of biofuels. I know there's the tension of food versus fuel. I worked on that in the World Bank, but there are other agendas or new frontiers for business that are connected to the future. And so I think this is another view, you need to not only think about feeding the population, but creating new agricultural businesses that are going to create jobs, generate income, pay taxes, and so have these spaces for financing many other things that will help to develop and deal with climate change as well. Okay, so when we say the future, we know that it's like tomorrow, right around the corner. So when we talk about food security, we have to produce food. And as we heard yesterday, the problem isn't the food. There is food. We have food that is thrown away because it's going bad in supermarkets, because they are expired. I talked to heard about a business that buys food that is about to expire in a few days, and then they sell it at a huge discount, you know. And they sell these to people who want to buy it at a much lower discounted price. So actually, the future is today. So we're coming close to the end of our time here. I want to respect the time that we had set aside for this, but I would like to give you a golden opportunity. So it's around 12:30 now, November 5th, 2025. So I would like to give you 1 minute, not 2 minutes now, just 1 minute for each of you to give us the recipe or the formula of how the financial resources can get into the hands of those who need it, those who want to produce. Maybe the larger farmers, like Lessa said, maybe they don't really want to go and sit down with Lessa. They have other ways of getting financing. But maybe the middle layer there. I like the way you separated the different layers or categories of agricultural producers. So maybe I think this would be interesting to hear from Alberto also, from Banco do Brasil. So I'm going to...
1 minute. That's the elevator pitch. Okay? 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I think it's, again, to ensure that if you are thinking about investing in Africa, Africa has opportunities, we mentioned it, and Rwanda is ready to be your gateway to Africa. We offer a conducive environment that is compliant. I think one of my predecessors mentioned it, compliance and, I'd say the fact that we are up to international standard is very important, so that will give trust to Brazilian and South America investors. And we are committed to support as a government, as an ecosystem builder, to make sure that your investment will be safe, will be able to be deployed on the continent, and you will absolutely get back your your investment in a very I would say very easy and
All right.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Vamos lá, Jorge Arbacho.
Okay, Mr. George Abash, 1 minute for your pitch. Well, bank isn't charity organization. Okay? Full stop. It's a bank. It's about business. If there's anything that we can do to make it easier to access financial resources, you need to look at small agricultural productions as a business. It has to have technology, human capital, the land right issues that are solved. Now, if there's a recipe or a formula from Brazil that we can transfer to Africa, many things can't be transferred or adapted, but one that I think that can be is the technology. I think Alberto mentioned this. So, secondly, the need to have trained workers and the appropriate infrastructure. So that comes, from appropriate public policies in local public policies. Well, I think that's a very good recipe. Thank you very much. I hope you wrote down the recipe. Alberto, 1 minute for your recipe. Well, to add to this, good technical assistance because we're talking about offering credit to the small farmers, to somebody who can help them, put the numbers down on paper, how their production can pay for itself, what the best crops are, when is the right moment to plant. So none of our current customers operate without technical assistance. So we have registered consultants that can offer technical assistance, over 5,000 consultants. They don't work for the bank, but they are associated and verified by Banco do Brasil as technical assistants to help these small producers. And then we are able to, put them in to work together. So also legal guarantees. So I agree with Georgie. A bank isn't a philanthropic organization. We aren't, your partners, because when the bank is loaning you money, so you are the bank will expect that the person who takes out the loan will pay back at the right moment. Okay, so tomorrow in the headlines, Alberto said that the bank is not your partner. The bank is your creditor. So that's true. It's not Mother Teresa. It's not a charity. They want their money that they have lent you. Well, Felipe, I think the best solution are public policies. There is this gap between capital and the producers. Like we said, there is a lot of capital available for agricultural production, but there is this gap. And the solution is in the public policies. Alberto gave us some great examples of public policies. And, using public policies, that's one way forward. Another solution that Brazil has done very well is cooperatives, because many of the barriers that we have of getting capital to these small farmers is because, they're just one in the middle of many. So when you have a cooperative, you centralize this, and there's bring these people together, and then they work together as one, not only for acquiring technology or acquiring products, but negotiating prices. But if you put together the public policies with cooperatives, that's the recipe. Okay, Lessa, you have 1 minute to give us your recipe. Well, you've already given all the great recipes. I have to come up with another one now. So I think that it's common sense that it's basically the same recipe. We need good, appropriate public policies for the different players in this business. When we talk about the small farmers, the public policies have to also forecast the interest rates, but also subsidize technical assistance. And for the large producers, we need infrastructure and legal solutions so that the money can be invested, but then that the money comes back to the bank also, because it won't work if that doesn't happen. Now, for the small and mid-sized producers, Rubini mentioned something that's interesting. Technical assistance alone isn't enough. You can improve their production, but then what will they do with what they have produced? So you have to have policies that you need to put these small farmers into this whole value chain with the cooperatives. You can do that. You can combine the volume and then put all of them together to help them become part of this cycle and this value chain. Well, that's a great recipe. Thank you very much to all of our panel members here. When I came here, I thought that I knew everything, but actually no. I knew that I didn't know much at all. And you have all taught me some great lessons today. We have some recipes to take back with us, but there is still a lot to be done. We need to go quite a ways still. And the great thing about having these discussions is that sharing these experiences and our knowledge from different areas can help those who are on the other side. So it's very good to have we didn't really talk about solidarity, but I hope that that's also a very important aspect. But I hope that these recipes that you have mentioned serve as inspiration for other talks in the future. Let's give a round of applause to our panel members. Thank you very much.